on an important aspect as already introduced by the moderator. See, two things you have to remember here. One is, like, again, I am re-emphasizing. So nutrition is a therapy, it's not a support. Okay, so nutrition is like a treatment, nutrition is like an antibiotic, it is like a source control, it is like a some sort of fluid resuscitation kind of this one. It is not just a support, it is a therapy. Okay, so when you think anything which are like we are doing in terms of therapy, so which should have an impact on the morbidity and the mortality. So it means like it should have some impact on the other organ dysfunction, like days and the length of ICU stay, length of ventilator days, length of hospital stay, and overall impact on the good outcome in terms of mortality. So when we do some intervention, like with a nutritional therapy, so it should have some value in all those parameters. See, initially the concept was something called nutritional screening. Okay, so means like identify the problem. Now we call it as nutritional assessment, as already explained by the previous speaker. So assessment includes like identify the problem and put a proper plan, therapeutic plan, and a personalized approach. That is the current role of nutrition in critically ill patients. With this background, if you see the burden of malnutrition globally, so it is going to be near about 20 to 50%. So in Indian scenario also we have a huge burden which is about 40%. So among 2/5 of the patients who require ICU admission, they are going to suffer from the malnourishment. If you consider, if you categorize using some sort of severity into mild, moderate, and severe, the percentage may vary from 45, 48, and 9% respectively. So we have all modality of presentation of the malnourishment, and the burden is very huge. It's about 40%. So why a critically ill patient who stayed in ICU is going to have malnourishment? There are multiple reasons. If you see, first and foremost is like he is going to have a very bad catabolic phase. Okay, so there is a lots of protein breakdown is going to be there in the initial phase of sepsis, what we call it as like ebb phase and the flow phase kind of this one. So on the other hand, there will be decreased anabolic hormones, and again there will be resistance to the existing anabolic hormones. So decreased overall intake. Okay, so then decreased substrate utilization because of the ileus and malabsorption. So increased needs from the critically ill patient. So there is something called resting energy consumption. So it is going to be increased if the patient is going to have a fever. So 1 degree Celsius is going to increase the resting energy consumption by more than 10%. Again, in trauma patients, particularly head injury, ARDS patients, immediate post major surgery patients, those patients who are mechanically ventilated, their resting energy consumption is going to be increased. So again, like one more reason is abnormal nutrient losses. So in the wound, or if they are having a drain tubes post surgery and all. So drug and nutrient interaction, particularly if they are on diuretics, there is a loss of potassium and some effect of the vasoactive agents which can have an impact on the absorption. So there are multiple combination permutation of these reasons why a critically ill patient is going to have the malnourishment in ICU setup. So again, if you think this GI is going to have a major impact because we need gut for proper digestion and absorption. So immune function, because gut is going to have something called galt and malt, gut associated lymphoid tissue and mucosa associated lymphoid tissue, which helps as an immunomodulator in critically ill patients, and it is a major protective barrier. If a patient came with some sort of head trauma and he got intubated and mechanically ventilated, if he had fever, so if the patient is not fed enterally in the initial couple of days, so all the gut mucosal barrier is going to translocate the gut organisms, particularly gram-negative organisms like Enterobacteriaceae like family, and an Enterococci, which is a gram-positive organism, into the bloodstream infection, and you can have very bad sepsis manifestation and all. So there are lots of correlational studies. So enteral feed is going to have an action as a protective barrier against this translocation of gut organism. Again, so compromised gut can have adverse consequences. It may be in relation to gut primary function itself. It can have persistent diarrhea or vomiting, malabsorption, gastroesophageal reflux, or critical illness with some sort of ileus because of the dyslipidemia, particularly hypokalemia, can have prolonged ileus. Remember, so ileus is going to again further like progress the ileus. So NPO, nil per mouth status, is the one trigger factor for the ileus, because if you don't feed them, there is no activation of the peristalsis through the pyloric antrum, which is going to have the pacemaker for the peristalsis. If you keep the patient NPO for long time, so patient is going to have the ileus in an augmented way. So that we need to remember. Again, as already explained, malnutrition is having a lots of impact in terms of prolonged ICU stay, impaired immune status, increased morbidity and mortality, slow wound healing, and altered pharmacokinetics of the pharmacodynamics of the medications, loss of muscle strength and body fat. So in pediatric patients, it is going to cause growth failure and weight loss. No doubt, malnutrition, it is a common sense, it's going to have multiple bad impact in a critically ill patient. So again, so if you see some data, see among critically ill patients, so only 50% of the patients we are going to achieve the calorie need on day-to-day life of the critical illness. About 74% of the mechanically ventilated patients fail to achieve 80% of their calorie targets. Again, the cessation of the enteral nutrition is going to occur in about more than 85% of the patient on an average of 8 to 20% of their infusion time. Overall, it is going to have the bad morbidity in terms of increased ventilator days, increase in complication, and increase in length of hospital stay. Again, malnourishment, no doubt, increases the morbidity, mortality, length of ICU stay, overall cost burden in hospital care. If you remember, in critically ill patients in tertiary care centers in India, even a single day of like decrease in length of stay is going to decrease the burden of cost by about 40 to 50,000 in corporate setup. So anything, any intervention which brings down the length of hospital stay is more welcoming. So basically, this can be like one impact if you target this malnutrition in critically ill patient in a good way, in a protocolized way. Again, so how much to give? We have the guidelines from the ASPEN, ESPEN, Canadian guidelines, Society of Critical Care Medicine, Survival Sepsis guidelines, lots of guidelines. They recommend calorie somewhere in between 25 to 30 kilocalories, and the protein of about 1.2 to 2 gram per kg per day of the actual body weight. So why a critically ill patient is going to compromise in their enteral nutrition in a single day? It is because of lots of intervention, shifting out the patient for some sort of the procedure, diagnostic modalities, maybe CT, MRI, putting an intercostal drain or some sort of interventional procedure. Because of unstable hemodynamics, remember, it is a relative contraindication to consider a patient not to feed enterally if he is on some sort of vasoactive agents, because if the patient is fairly controlled with his blood pressure with a stable concentration of requirement of the norepinephrine, it is okay to feed them. There are lots of literature is available, lots of evidence is there. If they are on moderate dosage of vasopressor, including the norepinephrine, it is okay to feed them. Okay, no worry in stopping entirely the enteral feeding. So delayed feed procurement, because by the time sister has finished her putting the notes, taking the handover, documenting the vitals and all, she might forget to procure the feed formula itself. That is one of the major limitation in Indian scenario when they had like particularly 1:2 allocation, 1:3 allocation. If they consider neurosurgical, neurological patient, they think, okay, patient is having a stroke, anyhow is having a tracheostomy tube inside tube, is having some rice tube, is stable. So then the allocation is going to be 1:2, 1:3 kind of this one. So they spend most of their time in documentation, taking handover, giving handover. So then they might forget to procure the feed formula and all. Again, other thing which add on to impairment of nutrition continuity in critically ill patient, if they have some minimal GI bleed, melena, diarrhea, it may be infective or non-infective. So then by reflex, the consultant may stop the feed and it can lead to loss of continuity of the enteral feeding. So what are the different types of enteral formulas we are available currently in the market? We have something called polymeric, elemental formula, semi-elemental, and specialized formula. See, if you remember, polymeric are the standard formula which we get. They are like intact food kind of this one. So they have an intact protein, complex carbohydrates, long chain triglyceride. they require a full functional gut for their action to happen. So they mimic macronutrients as food in whole. So again, with available in different energy densities and protein content. So elemental is something which is going to contain the breakdown product of the protein, that is amino acid, low in fat, especially long chain triglyceride, require minimal digestive function but causes less stimulation of the exocrine pancreatic secretion. Elemental feeds sometimes can have some sort of problem with osmotic diarrhea. So then comes to something called peptide based or semi-elemental formula. They contain the protein in an 100% way hydrolyzed oligopeptides. It may be dipeptide or tripeptide. So lipid is in the formation of medium chain triglyceride. So they are going to be absorbed more efficiently than that of the individual amino acid or the intact protein. So they also promote vaginal absorption of water and electrolytes. So basically they are the digested part of the protein. So in the formation of peptides. So then we have some sort of supporting specialized formula depending upon what a particular patient needs, depending upon their disease status. Like we have renal resource, hepatic resource, and all. They are called specialized formulas. So, like if you compare polymeric versus semi-elemental formulas, so as I already told, so semi-elemental better absorbed, less allergic, better tolerated, so cause less exocrine pancreatic stimulation, particularly in severe acute pancreatitis, helps in rapid achievement of the nutritional goals as compared to polymeric. So particularly in severe acute pancreatitis, see there is a myth even in current practice in tertiary care center. If a patient had severe acute pancreatitis with one or the other organ down, so they keep the patient in PO because they think if you stimulate the pancreas, that can lead to more and more autodigestion of the pancreas. That is a major myth in current practice still in tertiary care center. So again, if you give polymeric formula, it can stimulate the pancreas in a very bad way. So excess synthetic oleate, particularly in Crohn's disease, it can prevent the remission of the disease. So these are the disadvantages of polymeric feed as compared to semi-elemental, that is the peptide-based feed. So again, so this is a case scenario. This is an hypothetical case. See, we have lots of experience maybe in patients with post-surgical major gut surgery. Okay, in patients with severe sepsis and septic shock, in patients with ARDS who is on mechanical ventilator, trauma patients, burns patients. Okay, this is one patient who is a 65-year-old male. So diabetic, hypertensive, admitted to ICU with some sort of road traffic accident. Post surgery, he was on mechanical ventilation. His weight is 75 kg, height is 166 centimeter, with a BMI of 27.2. He's been intubated and ready to receive enteral nutrition. As per the recommendation, if you calculate calorie somewhere between 25 to 30 kilocalories per kg per day and the protein of somewhere between 1.2 to 2 gram per kg per day, so it ranges from 1875 to 2250 kilocalories per day and 90 to 150 grams of protein per day respectively. So if you target, we know that initially in critically ill patient, particularly in sepsis and all, in a first week, we don't want 100% achievement of the calorie requirement. So if it is like some sort of near about 80%, if you achieve the goal also, it is fantastic. Okay, if you take this at least 80%, so then the energy we need to like manage about 1500 kilocalories per day and a protein of 72 grams per day. So to meet this 80%, we have to give the isocaloric formula, means 1 kilocalories per 1 ml. We need to give the 1.5 liter of the feed. Because is a road traffic accident patient, definitely we have to get a CT of the thorax, CT of the brain, and he underwent some surgery, some imaging, some intervention, and with the background of his elderly nature, diabetic hypertension, if he had some sort of underlying chronic kidney disease, if it is not diagnosed, definitely it is a challenge to maintain this 1.5 liter of the feed that is of isocaloric in a particular day. So this is a big challenge in compromising the volume when it comes to a patient with some sort of criticality, with the background of some comorbidities, with multiple interventions, both for diagnostic and therapeutic. It's a big challenge. If you see, I have seen the patients, many nursing staff, if they open some sort of like one packet of the feed, it was run for 2-3 days without proper emptying up of the appropriate need of the feed kind of system. Then what we learned, okay, we labeled date, time. So I started from that root cause when we approached malnutrition It means like approaching critically ill patient and all. So it's very difficult to achieve this much of volume in any this kind of patient who presented to ICU with lots of interventions ongoing. So again, so this is one data which came from US. Okay, semi-elemental whey hydrolyzed protein formulas. What are the advantages and which category of the patient? This is the data, huge data from US. So they analyzed the patients with Crohn's disease, short bowel syndrome, acute and chronic pancreatitis, cerebrovascular accidents, geriatric patients, general medical intensive care patients who are critically ill, cystic fibrosis, cerebral palsy, and HIV patients. Semi-elemental whey hydrolyzed protein diet perform as well or better than the comparison diets, including the elemental based diet, parenteral nutrition, and regular oral feed. Better weight gain, better growth, reduced systemic inflammatory response, that is the SIRS response, efficiency of the nutrition assimilation, lower mortality, and overall decreasing the healthcare cost. This is the available large data and different group of patients. If you use semi-elemental, that's the peptide-based formula, lots of benefit in terms of the morbidity and mortality. Again, role of peptide as first-line nutrients for faster recovery of ICU patients. See, Aspen recommends energy is 25 to 30, protein is 1.2 to 2, and micronutrients depending upon the individual needs we need to give. How fast we need to give? As early as possible. Even all the guidelines, Aspen, even we have the guidelines for survive sepsis guidelines also, as early as possible. Don't even wait for 24 to 48 hours also. So give them feed enterally if there is no absolute contraindication. Remember, only absolute contraindication for feeding a patient is if they are having a perforation peritonitis, mesenteric ischemia, or acute active intestinal obstruction. So other than that, unstable hemodynamics, diarrhea, vomiting, these are all the relative contraindications. Still, we can consider them for feeding, so-called tropic or trickle feeding. So that should be our approach. So starting enteral feeding early, it is going to maintain the gut mucosal integrity. So it helps in maintaining the galt and malt. So it helps in the modulating the immune response in a favorable way. So overall decreasing length of stay and overall improvement in the outcome. So again, if you see the peptide based formula, so it is having lots of multiple benefits in terms of achieving that reduction in the mortality and that of the reduction in the morbidity, improved absorption, improved utility of the nitrogen, and that of the nitrogen based protein synthesis in the body, reduced bacterial translocation from the gut into the bloodstream infection, gut integrity maintenance, improved visceral protein synthesis, overall clinical outcome in terms of other organ improvement, including the liver function and reduction in the diarrheal episode, and overall enhanced immune support in a favorable way. This is the overview of utility of the peptide-based formula in critically ill patients. Again, peptide-based formulas help in achieving the nutritional goals. I already told only 50% of the patients they are going to achieve the calorie requirement in critically ill patient. So ability to process the intact protein is going to be reduced in patients with trauma, sepsis, and shock. So the tolerance, digestion, and that of the assimilation, that is the absorption, is going to be better with peptide-based formulas. There is no doubt in critically ill patients. Again, so Aspen recommends avoid using soluble and insoluble fiber in patients who are having some sort of bowel ischemia and severe dysmotility. Again, they recommend strongly for small peptide formulas if they have some sort of malabsorption or lack of response to fibers in terms of intolerance. So coming to most important aspect, how we can achieve this so-called something like protocolized, like peptide-based approach to improve the overall morbidity and mortality in terms of addressing this malnutrition. This is called PEPPER protocol. So what we have to understand is start with a concentrated semi-elemental formula, that is a peptide-based formula. So promote volume-based feeding. When it comes to the volume, so don't think of hourly based volume. Your accumulated in a particular day volume should be achieved in a good way. So that should be your end of the day goal. So achieve the requirement in a 24-hour. So again, accept a little bit high gastric residual volume. Remember, a patient normally is going to secrete 80 to 100 ml of gastric juice per hour. If you aspirate the gastric volume at the end of 4 hours, up to 300 to 350 ml is going to be normal. So continue the feeding, because if you remember, so in our practice, nurse is going to inform, sir, patient is having a right tube aspiration of 100 ml, 150 ml. It doesn't mean anything. Please continue the feeding. Accept a little bit higher gastric residual volume. So initiate tropic feeding, even though they are having some sort of unstable hemodynamics and vasoactive agents. You initiate them on a minimal, at least 20 to 25 ml of that trickle feed or tropic feed. Start afferently prokinetic medications like metoclopramide or maybe erythromycin. So these are the 5 important aspects of PEPAP protocol. Start concentrated semi-elemental feed, promote volume based at the end of the day. So liberalize the gastric threshold volumes, initiate tropic feed wherever necessary, and afferently start them on prokinetic feed. These are the 5 important components. Again, to start them on 25 ml per hour, calculate the 24-hour volume requirement. If you have a dietitian, take their help. Otherwise, you can use this ready-made table. So less than 50 kg, somewhere you can use 700 ml of the volume in 24 hours. So on. So for 50 to 65 kg, we can give 900 ml in 24 hours. So the 24-hour period from maybe 6 a.m. to 6 a.m., 7 a.m. to 7 a.m. But remember, your rate of infusion should not cross more than 150 ml. So this is an example. If you give like 50 ml per hour, okay, if the requirement in 24 hours is going to be 1200 ml, so it comes about 50 ml per hour. So if you infuse like 50 ml per hour for 10 hours, so 500 ml already finished. So then, suppose if you shift the patient for some intervention, okay, there is a hold of about 4 to 5 hours. So subtract this 500 ml from the overall requirement, that is about 1200 ml, it remains about 700 ml. If you calculate the 700 ml over the remaining period of 9 hours, so it comes about 78 ml per hour. So at the end of the day, even though you missed the 5 hours of enteral feeding, you can make up with this so-called PEPAP protocol. It is very interesting. It's having a very good evidence support also. So again, this is a ready-made table which is available based on the volume calculation. Suppose if you assume like 1400 ml you have to give, you have to see for the remaining hours. If it is remaining somewhere around 19 hours, you have to give the 76 ml per hour. Don't cross more than 150 ml per hour, because patient is not going to tolerate this volume of 150 ml per hour. He might regurgitate or he might vomit. So your upper limit should be 150 ml per hour, and you can use this ready-made table to calculate the volume for the remaining hours of your feed in a particular day. Again, I told it is supported by a very major, very good evidence globally. This is one interesting paper which got published long back in 2013 in one of the important journals, that is Critical Care Medicine. It is being conducted in US and Canada. Enhanced protein energy provision via the enteral route feeding protocol in critically ill patient. Results of cluster randomized trial. So here they clearly use a so-called semi-elemental PEPAP protocol, that is the peptide-based feed approach to address the malnourishment. So 18 ICUs has been included in Canada and the US, near about 1,000 odd mechanically ventilated who are critically ill patients. They has been randomized to the intervention group, that is the PEPAP protocol, against that of the regular standard way of feeding. So they again adhere to all those 5 principles, like decide the volume, start the concentrated feed, accept a little bit high gastric residual volume, and consider tropic feed wherever necessary. And at the end of the day, apparently you can consider starting them on some sort of prokinetic agent. So these are the 5 agenda they achieved. If you see the result, there was an increase in achievement of the protein and energy requirement by about 14%, which was very statistically significant, without any increase in complication rates. There was a decrease in average time from ICU admission to start of enteral nutrition in the intervention group compared to that of the standard group. Lots of very good impact on enhanced protein energy provision via enteral feeding route is safe and results in modest but statistically significant increase in protein and calorie intake, especially in ICUs with low baseline nutritional adequacy. So this is the impact of this major randomized controlled trial. So basically where we can use, again I am re-emphasizing, Crohn's disease, short bowel syndrome, pancreatitis, which may be acute or chronic, cerebral palsy, cystic fibrosis, critically ill patients in medical intensive care unit, geriatric patient, retroviral disease, and patients with stroke with any sort of cerebrovascular accident. So again, take home message here, we have a huge burden of malnutrition globally, which is about 20 to 40%. When it comes to Indian scenario, near about 40% of critically ill patients, they suffer from malnourishment. Again, only 50% of the target calorie we are able to achieve in critically ill patient, which leads to increase in ICU length of stay, overall cost. When we used PEPA protocol with a semi-elemental feed as an option, we can decrease this cost burden by about more than 20 to 25%. Definitely, semi-elemental formulas are better absorbed, less allergic, well tolerated, and thus helping the achieving of nutritional goals faster. Compared to other formulas, semi-elemental formulas are associated with better growth and weight gain, lower mortality rate, lower healthcare cost. So peptide-based formulas are well tolerated, faster recovery in even in post-surgery patients also. So they are going to have good GI tolerance and improved nutrient absorption overall. So this is having a very good evidence-based approach to curb the mortality and morbidity when we have this so-called PEPA protocol in addressing the malnourishment in critically ill patients. So basically, we need to understand when, as an intensivist, always we think about airway, breathing, circulation, and all. So we have to give weightage to this D part, that is the nutrition. Thank you all.
Thanks, Dr. Harish Mallapura. It was an excellent presentation. I think it gave a detailed perspective of feeding critically ill patients. And to add on to the summary of what we discussed in the last half an hour or so, I think it's quite interesting to see that a lot of studies and a lot of evidence has come to play showing critical care nutrition is very pivotal in improving your patients' outcomes in intensive care. So obviously, when you have a patient entering your ICU, you should have a culture of feeding them. Okay, unless there is a culture in our ICUs to feed all our patients, we are not going to move forward. If you see all our ICUs, despite all the evidence backing up, if you see there's a lot of ICUs, we don't feed our patients, they fall behind on feeding, they come with malnutrition and leave the hospital with malnutrition, or maybe they may not be alive. Most of the patients were not fed well. So obviously you need to know which patients you're going to feed in ICU. Assuming all your patients are malnourished is the best way to start with, and then probably implementing a tool to screen your patients or to assess your patients who are at risk is definitely going to add on. It doesn't really matter what tool you're going to use, as long as you're comfortable with some tool which you routinely use and we're very comfortable with, and your unit is familiar. It's not only you imagine that you have a whole team of people who work. There are days which you're not there and you will have juniors. Make sure that everybody is comfortable with some tool which you're going to effectively implement in the ICUs. Okay, so once you understand that, yeah, this patient is at risk of malnutrition, you probably have to concentrate on this patients probably better than the other patients, so that you can effectively intervene, do monitoring, as well as look at therapeutic approaches in nutrition which will best help this patient from the nutritional point of view. And I guess we probably will see the whole summary of feeding a patient is feed them adequately. Okay, but adequately means there are two parts, like they have protein and as well as energy, which is calories. So what is most important is feeding them with adequate protein, say at least 80% of the calculated needs of a patient. So that you achieve over a period of few days, obviously somewhere between third to fifth day in most of the critically ill patients, you try to have a balance sheet, thinking that yes, I'm following this and I'm trying to get onto the protein, and my patient is almost there 80%. I think that's what should be the minimum target. You can feed up to 80%. Anything below 80%, obviously it is shown to affect the outcome of patients adversely in terms of either infectious complications or other kind of multi-organ dysfunction, and obviously morbidity and mortality in some of the severely malnourished patients. And the second component of that is the calories. So obviously there are various formulas you can employ, and probably in India, probably we stick on to the basic calculations and weight-based formulas, which is probably not very inferior to the gold standard, which is indirect calorimetry, which we normally read in many of literature. But usually, Western countries are very familiar with that. In Indian scenarios, I think we'll just stay away from that as of now, because I don't think any ICUs are well equipped to handle those complex things. So just calculating simply with the weight-based formulas gives you an idea, and you really know you don't have to stress about feeding your patients from the calorie point of view, because even hypocaloric feeding in today's literature is very well accepted. Yes, I can. Everybody has heard about permissive underfeeding, or trying to maintain the calories somewhere around 60, 70 to 80%, which is okayish. Okay, but targeting a protein target, I think protein, what is very important in ICU is what is the bottom line. Try to maintain at least 80 to 100% of the protein target in the first 5 days of the patient's admission. And now the challenge is, once you start making, okay, I've calculated how much to give, but how I'm going to give my patient and how I'm going to monitor this patient is very important, because we enthusiastically start feeding a patient, but at the end of the day, after a few days, we lag behind. The patient has a big protein debt or calorie debt, and you cannot catch up, and you can't feed previous days deficit to the next day, isn't it? Obviously, it's very difficult. So having some kind of protocol will help you in feeding such patients. And as Dr. Harish Mallapura has emphasized, and I think we have all used at some point volume-based feeding, I think it helps a lot. And I think I've taken a few questions from one of our people here watching us. I think what standard protocols do you follow? I think I can't say standard protocol. I think we should have a universal protocol to feed our patients. So traditionally, we have been feeding our patients with rate-based protocols where, okay, you start with 25 ml per hour, and after so many hours or the next day, you make it 35 or 40 or 50, which really doesn't work. And majority of the studies have shown people who have used rate-based feeding protocols have fallen short of targets. So that's why this PEPA protocol, which is probably formally came into picture in clinical practice in 2014 after multiple studies, has proven to be very effective in feeding of patients. So which is nothing but a volume-based feeding, and which has been clearly explained by Dr. Harish Mallapura. And the second challenge is what feed I'm going to use. I think there are a plethora of feeds in the market, and everybody carries like 20 different kind of feeding formulas, and all our nutritionists are quite aware of the feeding formulas. But probably I would emphasize that, see, if you want to put your money on something, you want to make sure the patient absorbs well and you can achieve the protein and calorie target. I think semi-elemental formulas are the best bet, in at least in the first few days of the patient's admission to critically ill patients, because the incidence of GI intolerance is quite low, as explained in the previous studies and by the earlier speakers. So at least for the first 3 to 4 days, try to start with the semi-lentil formulas, and then you can switch over to whole protein or polypeptide formulas, whichever you are comfortable with. So I think this is the basic foundation of feeding all your patients in ICU, and this is how you have to universally have something, or each I would say each unit can come out with a protocol which is based on volume-based feeding. And the type of feeds what you're going to use is based on some scientific principles what you have discussed. You can employ it as per your comfort. And obviously monitoring such patients for feeding intolerance like gastric residual volume, all those things are still controversial. But if your unit is used to GRV monitoring, you can always do it. I think there's no harm in doing GRV volumes. And obviously intolerance can be dealt in different ways, like using metoclopramide or erythromycin in case patient has got high GRV. And the next challenge is most of the patients are severely malnourished in ICUs, or who are having some degree of malnutrition. Monitoring for refeeding syndrome is extremely important. I think I cannot end this talk without emphasizing the need for monitoring these biochemical parameters, which often goes off track, especially phosphates, the magnesium and potassium. This is what we call biochemical monitoring. And obviously you do it every day in a unit, but in some patients you have to do it more often than once in 24 hours. So I guess we have given a big perspective of how you're going to deal with feeding of patients in critically ill. And there are certain challenging scenarios in intensive care, like feeding a hemodynamically unstable patient, feeding a patient who is not tolerating feeds. So at least in such patients, there is a concept called as trophic feeding, that if your gut is functional, you have to make an attempt to feed them at least something. So that is what the concept behind trophic feeding is, at least 10 to 20 ml per hour, or you can say about 10 to 20% of your energy needs should be given through the GI tract. because it stimulates a malt and galt. I think Dr. Harish Malapura has emphasized on the importance of the immune function through malt and galt. So this is the whole mechanism behind why we advise trophic feeding for patients who really are intolerant, as long as your GIT is intact. So I guess this gives a big perspective of how we feed on our patients, and we'll take some questions from here on. If I think there are other people from different parts of the country asking few things, so I think we'll take few questions if Dr. Priyanka and Dr. Harish Malapur are okay with it.
Yes, please.
Yeah, see, I think the first question I myself might take. See, there's a question from Bihar. One of them wants to know, how do you feed a patient with a creatinine of 2 and who is severely malnourished? So I think that's a very common question everyone comes out with in one session or the other. How to feed a patient with high creatinine. So again, there are two things to know here. See, whether the patient has got a stable creatinine or a dynamically changing creatinine is very important for you to decide. If patient is having a creatinine of 2 and we've been living with that, what we call it as chronic kidney disease, you usually probably don't really worry about how much proteins you give. You can still give adequate number of proteins to this patients up to 1.5 grams per kilo per day, or if in case the patient is on dialysis, you can go up to 2 to 2.5. But if this patient is have a dynamic, say, imagine a patient enters ICU with a creatinine of 2, and tomorrow the creatinine is 3, and it doubles every day. That means this patient has a worsening renal function. The patient is at very high risk of uremia. So obviously, you try to be little, strict on how much protein you want to give. But in such scenarios, at least 1 gram per kilo per day is not very bad. So it doesn't mean that you have to withhold feeding this patient or try to feed them on a very low scale protein, because anything less than 0.8 grams per kilo per day does not really, make any difference to the patient's clinical outcome. And in fact, it is harmful. So try to maintain something at least around 1 gram per kilo per day in such patients, and keep monitoring the urea, which is very important than creatinine. The patient is showing increasing trend in urea, because sometimes we see in ICU patients that urea stays more or less within 10% of the admission urea. So in such patients, you can still confidently go ahead and give them extra proteins as needed. So that's the first question, which actually came from Bihar. There's another question which actually came from other part of the country. I think Dr. Priyanka can take that. The question is, what standard ICU protocol do you follow in your units? Or I would say, do you think PEPA protocol would be the way to go? So I think both the questions can be answered in a similar way. I think Priyanka can take the first. What standard ICU protocol do you follow in your unit?
We initiate as early as possible. We follow continuous feeding and permissible optimal feeding, and then on a progression.
Okay. And Dr. Harish Malapura, do you think volume-based feeding should be the way to go?
Yeah, there is no doubt. See, because if you think like hourly rate kind of this one, as I already explained, lots of things are going to be messed up in critically ill patients. So you accumulate the volume in a single day, try to achieve that volume with matching up of a concentrated formula-based feed, so that adjust the rate. You should have some sort of fixed protocol to go for that. So that is the way go, means like way to go kind of.
See, if your unit is having a lot of trouble dealing with this rate-based regimens, and you often feel your unit is having a lot of depth over a period of few days, once the patient gets admitted, I think volume-based feeds works well in majority of the scenarios. I think, Dr. Priyanka, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yes, we in fact participated in the INS study, and only with volume based feeds we were able to meet up the targets.
Yeah.
Not otherwise.
So suppose a patient is on like started with some sort of 20 ml. Again, after that, we'll go for like 40 ml after 4 hours. Again, you go to 60 ml kind of this. And lots of intricacy, like the sisters and the treating clinician should understand. See, a patient came with some sort of trauma to the brain. Okay, it is nothing to do with his gut. Okay, straight away you can start up with whatever the volume you calculated and divide it 24 hours. But the problem is for any patient, so some of my residents in the beginning days and that they will start 20 ml per hour. After 4 hours, go to like 35, 40 ml kind of this one. Over a 24 hours, they keep on increasing, or maybe next day kind of this one. use the gut properly, because it is nothing to do with, he had a stroke, okay, it is nothing to do with his gut. He is an young patient with some sort of clear-cut head injury. His resting energy consumption is going to be increased by about 100 to 200% in a patient who is going to have a severe head injury. Please go up on the volume. Don't think, okay, we have to go stepwise only kind of this one. So all those things practically they need to understand at the bedside kind of this one.
Yeah. There's another question. I think it's a little off track, but I guess whether to give soluble or insoluble fiber for patients with IBD. I think Dr. Priyanka probably can take that.
We prefer giving soluble fiber because it has shown to reduce the remissions, and the lesion recovery is also better in the intestines.
Yeah. So one more question has come from Bhuvaneshwar, Orissa. A trauma patient, what should be the target in the first 24 hours? And how do we really go about calculating the needs in this trauma patient? I assume it's a polytrauma patient.
So polytrauma, again, definitely we have to concentrate on the protein intake. Okay, we can go up to the upper limit of the protein, maybe 2 gram per kg per day kind of thing, achieving a calorie somewhere between, again, around 25 to 28 kilocalories per kg per day kind of this one. Again, remember, so polytrauma, lots of intervention, as I explained, like lots of imaging is going to happen. So calculate the volume for 24 hours. If there is any missed period in between, achieve that volume. So calculate the upper limit of the protein, preferably a calorie of somewhere around 25 to 28 kilocalories per kg per day. Accumulate the volume in 24 hours, try to achieve that. And one more thing, since
yes,
like trauma came in the picture, see, like I will not go into some concept of immunonutrition or pharmaconutrition kind of this one. So maybe if the patient is having trauma without any background of renal dysfunction and all, it's worth to consider some sort of so-called conditional essential amino acid glutamine as an option in trauma and burns patient. That is an add-on difference as compared to regular critically ill patients kind of this one.
Yeah, what we need to remember is, see, again, there are patients category in ICU who actually will have adequate nutrition on arrival to ICU, especially trauma patients. Usually trauma patients, if you see, they are quite okay, like they're malnourished, isn't it? So, but they are the highest risk of malnutrition over a period of time. So as Dr. Harish Mallapura mentioned, in the first 24 to 48 hours, you should make sure you straight away go on as much as possible on top of it. But definitely after 48 hours, you need to be on top of your proteins because they are highly catabolic and you can see them in front of your eyes. They easily start losing weight. At the end of 1 week, it will be very difficult to identify some trauma patients from day one. So we have seen patients in critically ill where muscle wasting is so common, and they lose their even identity. So that's so important for us to feed such kind of patients very aggressively. And I think trauma patients benefit the most in such scenarios. I guess there are not much questions coming out. So I think we have clubbed many questions into one. So if we are okay, I think we can close the session.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Ambekar, for moderating the session, and Dr. Mallapura and Dr. Priyanka. It was a good presentation and it was a fantastic discussion, which highlighted a lot of important nutrition-related goals in the intensive care units. So my sincere thanks to all of you and all the participants, on behalf of Mr. Abdul Hanan, our cluster business head from SAR region, and entire Nestle team to we appreciate that you have been here and sparing the valuable time with us during this challenging times. So I thank you very much. Have a good evening and stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.